Hydropower has already used all available appropriate geographics globally. Nuclear would first need a hell of a PR campaign to sufficiently improve its image. If only solar and wind are doing the lifting, they would need a ninefold build-out to fully displace fossil fuels. No matter what happens politically or technologically, we are nowhere near being done with oil. The dominant environmental concern with all things oil has been about carbon dioxide emissions. But technologies like the internal combustion engine that burn oil products to produce those emissions are hardly the only things that use oil. Oil is also the base material for the bulk of the world's petrochemical needs. That sector is not a rounding error. So this is what I was just saying, right? Oil is used for other things as well, and it's indispensable to those things. Green tech does not make a country immune to geopolitics. It just shifts the view. Climate, temperature, land cover, resource location, distance, and maritime choke points are hardly the only geopolitical factors. So are latitude, elevation, humidity, temperature, surface angle, wind speed, wind reliability, solar radiation, and seasonal weather variation. So he goes into how solar and wind energy may work in very specific regions around the world. He himself actually has a solar panel. He had one in Austin that became paid for itself after 7 years or so. So he recovered his investment after 7 years in the among the most beneficial solar conditions.
And to that point, I just want to say the most beneficial solar conditions aren't just that it's sunny all the time, it's that it's in an area where people need air conditioning, because you need the air conditioning during the day when it's sunny. The energy's available to use for the air conditioning, as opposed to places where it's cold and there's not a lot of sun. You need heat, and you need it at night when there's no sun.
Right. And then he later on he goes into the ability to store all this in a battery, and he talks about the insanity of that proposition based on the technology we have available, even just to power the existing electrical grid. But then on top of that, to run cars on electricity, run everything on electricity, how impossible that is given current technologies. Fourth is the issue of density. So density, he talks about how, solar panel requires a lot of space. Fossil fuels are so concentrated that they're literally energy in physical form. In contrast, all green techs require space. Solar is the worst of the bunch. It is roughly 1,000 times less dense than systems powered by more conventional means. Consider America's megalopolis, the line of densely packed cities from Boston in the north to the greater DC area in the south. Collectively, the coastal cities of this line comprise roughly 1/3 of the American population on a tiny footprint. So the impossibility of the unavailability of enough space to use solar to power this region.
Yeah, right. Because you stuck all your solar farms in Texas, you can't get it to where all the people are living on the northeast / east coast. And
then also the technology is very unreliable, right? Like you said, wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine, except for very specific regions. Fifth point, even if solar and wind were equivalent technologies to oil, natural gas, and coal in terms of reliability, decarbonizing the grid would remain a mammoth task. Currently, 38% of global power is carbon-free, suggesting we'd only need to roughly triple the good slice to displace the bad. Wrong. Hydropower has already used all available appropriate geographics globally. Nuclear would first need a hell of a PR campaign to sufficiently improve its image. If only solar and wind are doing the lifting, they would need a ninefold build-out to fully displace fossil fuels. Sixth, even in the geographies where green tech works well, it is at best only a partial patch. Green tech only generates electricity. Wind and solar might theoretically be able to replace coal in some specific locations, but electricity of any type is not compatible with existing infrastructure and vehicles that use oil-derived liquid fuels. Such restriction naturally leads to discussion of electric vehicles as a wholesale replacement for those powered by internal combustion engines. Such is far more difficult than it sounds. The entirety of the global electricity sector generates roughly as much power as liquid transport fuels. Run the math. Switching all transport from internal combustion to electric would necessitate a doubling of humanity's capacity to generate electricity. Again, hydro and nuclear couldn't help. So that 9-fold increase in solar and wind is now a 20-fold increase. Nor are you even remotely done. You now need absolutely massive transmission capacity to link the locations where wind and solar systems can generate power to where that power would ultimately be consumed. In the case of Europe and China, those power lines have to jump continents. You're also assuming minor little details break your way, such as the wind always blowing, or the sun never setting, or there never being hiccups in transmitting power from the Libyan desert to Berlin, or the outback to Beijing. More likely, EVs with today's technology will work only if we double down on the very energy resources that environmentalists say we're trying to cut out of the system. In my not so humble opinion, we need to tackle first things first. We need to green the grid before we expand it. And unfortunately, the pace of that effort is painfully slow. From 2014, when the solar boom began, until 2020, solar has only increased to become 1.5% of total energy use.
Well, and then don't forget, just the fact that it's creating energy, you got to use it as you create it, as we just mentioned. So there's the baseline energy that coal or nuclear can, or even hydroelectric can supplant, which is to say, okay, regardless of what's going on with the weather or what time of day it is, we could produce this energy, which acts as the baseline. And the wind and the solar, because they're erratic, they need to be on top of that, because when the energy demand goes up, they have to turn the crank, or turn the dial and turn up the energy production, and you can't do that with the solar and the wind. You just get whatever the hell you get.
Right. So here he shows total global energy production. The big slice here is conventional, and this little slice here is none of so-called fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. But out of that, as we discussed, we have a large part is hydro, which has already exhausted, which we've already exhausted. Then there's nuclear, which is comes with regulatory and
PR problems.
And people don't really like to be at the receiving end of nuclear waste for some weird reason. So part of what makes the modern world work is on-demand electricity, like you said. So this would have to be available on demand. Like the existing grid is incredibly good at this. Part of what makes dispatchability so attractive is that there are peaks and troughs in normal electricity demand. Okay, so usually peak electricity demand is between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. with higher demand rates in the winter. However, peak solar supply is between 11 and 3 p.m., exactly outside that hours, and definitely not in the winter, right? So solar is mostly available when we least need it.
Except if you're in a hot place that needs air conditioning.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
And that's before considering that the same panel will generate different amounts of power based on location. My panels in the highlands of Colorado would spit out less than 1/5 of the power in the doldrums of Toronto. No amount of money enables us to ignore this little geographic problem. Unlike coal or natural gas, which can be pre-positioned, the wind blows where the wind blows and the sun shines where the sun shines. Any green tech generated electricity must then be wired to where it can be used. This is also not free and often results in the doubling and more of the cost of the delivered power. He goes here into... he also talks about how California cheats, right? California claims that they use a very high percentage of renewable energies, but they also import fossil fuel energies, and it doesn't appear on their calculation.
Oh, because it's not created internally, it's imported, and they just don't put it in the math.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That sounds very Californian to me.
Yeah. I think Germany has always done something like that. Germany has imported a lot from nuclear energy countries such as Sweden and France, if I'm not mistaken. And then they present the numbers of, hey, look at us, we produce so and so much with solar and wind. Somewhere here he talks about, so this is interesting here. Assuming that the technological improvements in the world of batteries that have unfolded since 1990 continue into 2026, the cost of a 4-hour lithium grid storage system, so the cost of a system that gives us 4 hours of buffer, right? So creating the battery system to store the solar and wind energy would cost about $240 per megawatt hour of capacity, or 6 times that of the standard combined cycle natural gas plant, which is currently the most common electricity generating asset. That's just for the battery, okay? That's not for the solar panels, for the upfront investment. Just for the battery, $250 an hour already. So anyone interested? Anyone
Yeah,
want
I'll throw my investment money up right away on that.
As of 2021, the US had 1,100 gigawatts of installed electricity generation capacity, but only 23 gigawatts of electricity storage. Roughly 70% of the 23 gigawatts is something called pumped storage, in essence using excess generated power to pump water uphill and then allowing that water to flow down a water course to power a generator as needed. Most of the other 30% is some sort of storage capacity located in people's homes. Only 0.73 gigawatts of storage is actually in the form of batteries. The American state that is most committed to the ideology of a green future is California. The state as a whole has but enough total storage, not battery storage, total storage for 1 minute of power. LA, the American metropolitan area, with the most aggressive plan for installing grid storage, doesn't anticipate reaching 1 hour of capacity until 2024. Remember that's 1 hour for LA's current electricity, okay? That's not for
no growth. That's assuming no growth.
Yeah. Well, that's not for the grandiose plans they have for only EV vehicles at one point, 2020, 2035, all cars, which they have now made a law.
And they will, Washington State just did it.
And they will, he talked about this on Joe Rogan's podcast, they will walk those laws back when the time comes.
Yeah.
There's going to be new administration in place, they're going to come up with excuses and reasons. 8th, there's a little discussed financial issue that might soon make the entire discussion moot. In places with good solar wind resources, most current price assessments suggest that the combined lifetime cost of fuel, maintenance, and installation for green tech versus conventional is more or less equal. From the financial point of view, the primary difference is when capital must be committed. About 1/5 of the total cost. So basically, the way these solar and wind projects are financed is everything is upfront. The entire cost is upfront, and
you reap your benefits over years after that.
Right, and then it's basically, he says it's free, but it's not even necessarily free because you have to maintain the solar panels and you have to fix the turbines and all that stuff. But I guess maybe if you run the math, compared to oil, the upfront investment with so-called fossil fuels is much lower, and you pay it over time. So it's much more. And he talks about in the capital-starved world of the future, this may be an issue. So capital-rich world of the order, it's fine. Capital-starved, where it's less people investing, also less foreign investment, obviously. Right? There's less interaction between the different countries. It's going to be more protectionism, etc. There's going to be less opportunity to attract foreign investment. So the option A is for this is far worse than it sounds from the point of view of greenhouse gas emissions, because the vast majority of these locations will not be able to retain access to internationally traded oil and natural gas. If they cannot source oil or natural gas and their geographics do not enable sufficient use of solar and wind, they will have a simple decision to make. Option A is to go without electricity, to deindustrialize, to decivilize. Option B, to use that one fuel source that nearly all countries have locally, coal. Many particularly unlucky people will be stuck with something called lignite, or barely qualifies as coal fuel, that is typically 1/5 water by weight and is by far the least efficient and dirtiest fuel in use today. Germany already today uses lignite as its primary power input fuel because green tech is so woefully unapplicable to the German geography, and yet the Germans, for environmental and I would say ideological reasons, have shut down most of their other power generation options. Germans, not as smart as you might think. So
sounds like a good commercial.
Right, so this is also what happened now that Germany has realized that it's not so easy to get natural gas when they piss off the Russians. They have gone back to coal under a green government, a green administration that has touted these plans of
That's right.
decarbonizing. They now had to go back to and ramp up the dirtiest fuel source in use today.
I have a funny story. So
Congratulations, Germany.
when I was
Congratulations, government.
living in Austria, one of the friend families, like I've got friends with the whole family, was a family of engineers. And while I was over there, Wolfgang, the paterfamilias of the family, pulls out this book and he starts showing me that I think it was after World War II, when Germany and Austria were just bombed to smithereens, they didn't have anything. They were literally making cars that ran off of carbon monoxide from burning wood. So you would burn wood in this compartment that would generate the carbon monoxide that would go to another compartment, and then you'd burn the carbon monoxide in order to make the car go. So I wonder if Germany is going to be opening those books back up again here pretty soon. Be like, okay, let's chop down some trees so the car can go 5 miles today or something.
Yeah. Locations facing the greatest shortages are those major consumers at the very end of those vulnerable supply lines. Northeast Asia and Central Europe, with Germany, Korea, and China by far facing the greatest threats, as none have proximate oil or natural gas sourcing, nor the military capacity to venture out to secure someone else's. There will be electricity problems, which the Germans have seen that as well. In the UK, I believe, they've also had incredibly expensive electricity prices over the winter. All three use a mix of nuclear, natural gas, and coal for the vast bulk of their electricity needs, all based on imported fuel. Of these, China is by far the most vulnerable. 3 decades of growth has strained the country's electricity system. Country has no spare capacity. It runs all of its power generation flat out, regardless of the input fuel. So any input shortage would at a minimum lead to large-scale rotating blackouts. It's already happened. So that's what China did during the lockdowns, during the COVID scam. Countries like the UK, France, Japan, and India do have the military wherewithal and geographic position that will enable them to go out and secure resources themselves, but all will face a price environment of terrifying proportions. The ironic bottom line is that the US is one of only a handful of countries that not only will not face a protracted energy crisis, but can also attempt oil and natural gas substitutes at scale. So the US is actually best positioned to use these lofty green among the best positioned to utilize these green technologies,
and we're the ones who need them the least because we have so much frickin' oil.
Right. So the southeastern US has a lot of sun, and the Great Plains have a lot of consistent wind, and Australia is very suitable for solar as well, and then patches in the North Sea apparently have some consistent sun supply. And so for all these topics we've addressed so far, transport, finance, and energy, the United States is the lucky country. That luck is deep-rooted in geography, which means it can be applied to other situations as well. For if you think the Americans have made it on these first 3 topics, just wait until you see the impact of the Americans' luck upon the next 3. And the next chapter, he gets into industrial materials, which we will cover now. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, let's kind of look at this in from a, again, 30,000-foot view. It's for you and me, and maybe the people listening who like to listen to us, this isn't really anything new. It kind of confirms everything that we said, that, like, yeah, oil is pretty freaking important, and most of this green technology is not capable of doing anything near what it says. But it's, I mean, on one hand, it's good to hear that at some point, you know, the demands of reality are going to start walking this green crap backwards, because it's just, you know, the people are going to decide between dying and having energy. And I think even the people who are like, yeah, let's reduce the human population, when it comes to their turn, they're going to be like, no.
Oh, no,
drill the oil. Yeah.
And you see this more and more, this climate, this mental illness of fetishizing the changes in weather and the desire to stop the weather from changing.
Yeah.
It's now fading into the background. You can see it in the public discussion. When Zeihan was on Joe Rogan the other day, he actually called it a religion. He literally said, it's a new religion. And Joe Rogan who used to be a believer in the hypothesis of catastrophic man-made climate change. I remember we had Jordan Peterson on, and he kind of started drilling him on it because Jordan Peterson doesn't believe it. And now Joe Rogan, when on this call with Zeihan, he sounded much more
Converted.
well. He sounded not just skeptical. He'd realized that it's a lot of baloney, a lot of bullshit, and Zeihan called it a religion. So
That's a good sign. That makes me feel better about Zeihan.
this is something that's been going on. This is a long-term thing. This scam has been so well funded and orchestrated by the UN and the mega corporations that fund and make up the UN, and the media corporations that toe that line. It's going to take some time for it to fall apart and go crawl back into the hole where it's come from, never to return. Probably they've come up with a new scam at one point, and they always do, right? We've seen the Kufid, we've seen this, but it's a promising development.
It is. And I mean, the terrifying and promising development of the fact that the whole Eastern Hemisphere's oil situation is about to come down like a house of cards, while simultaneously the oil situation on the Western Hemisphere, particularly, Canada, United States, and Mexico, looks pretty freaking good. So it's good to know that, because again, there was once upon a time I could have made a decision to live in Europe, and holy shit, am I glad I didn't make that decision, Nima. And I'm glad you came here instead of staying there.